The main highlight, Isla Navarino, which is like um, which has the southernmost town, basically. It's like as south as you can go without being in Antarctica.
Oh, wow.
And then did like a big 5 day trek there, which was very fun, super
Glad you survived.
trail. Yeah. The weather was very good. Otherwise, it would
Yeah,
have
I
been
saw the
crazy.
photos and the
Yeah.
road looked fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to dive in. I think people are still trickling in, but I want to make sure. Uh, Updates from the quick demo on Friday. How many of you were able to make it? Anybody in the room? No? Yes? Nobody else?
We went, but we couldn't find the building.
What?
We couldn't find the roof in the building.
Yeah,
So
it's
we
in the
put it-
basement.
Oh yeah, we asked in the Discord.
And there's no Wi-Fi in the basement.
Yeah, no, we were waiting outside, like on the campus drive. But then I guess I didn't check the messages. Yeah, we
Okay.
got in at like 9:40.
Because some work will be happening in that room, so it makes sense to have both people know. I guess now everybody knows. No, not everybody knows that room, right? That's
Yeah.
no, not the PsyQ room. Because PsyQ, I mean, some of the imaging equipment that you guys will have access to, depending on projects, will be in that space. It's in the basement of biology building. Let's make sure that you've all visited. Any highlights from what was the demo you guys did on Friday?
We looked at the malaria samples under the microscope.
Yeah,
Cool.
you go through the whole cycle.
Of just putting the blood slide in.
Yeah.
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 So
And he showed us as well the YouTube channels, the YouTube videos.
yeah, but
Nice.
you did the full actual diagnosis from an unknown patient.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, any comments from the demo that people saw?
Yeah, we weren't able to stream the demo online.
Nobody was
Yeah.
online.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive in. We'll talk about diagnostics today, just the big picture thread on diagnostics. I think before we start, let's do a quick review on project teams and where we are in terms of timing. What's I think the ideal case would be is this week particularly, let's do a thread on what we often call the idea boards, which is at this point, I think, we'll cover diagnostics this week and we'll cover some of the broader threads on oceanography next week. But if there is a class of problems, either on past projects, things that you're excited about, this would be the time. Because I think maybe in 2 weeks' time, I want to make sure that project teams are set. So this week would be your time to sort of expand as much as you want, and then the next week will be contracting. And yes, it might be that you're super excited about an idea, but you didn't recruit anybody in the team. It's a smaller enough cohort, then it's harder to pursue that as a project. Do we have a place where people can put?
No, not yet. Maybe we can talk
Yeah,
about that
you guys
later.
talk about, let's do that together first. I think what I would like is we used to have Notion. Looks like Notion has a paid framework, and I want to really this to be an open framework. So wherever people write, it should be open. So the idea would be is there is a common. Do you know if the old Notion we still have access, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Why don't I just show everybody what that page will look like, even if that page is not physically accessible. So can you share that Notion page with me
Yes.
for a second? And I'm gonna go on my Slack. If I do Frugal Science, that has the Zoom link, right?
It's pinned.
Oh, it's on that channel.
I just sent.
So just, is anybody already? Oh. Okay, should I open my audio or no?
Yeah, I'll mute mine.
Okay. So I just want to do a quick logistics. Oh. Everybody can hear me? So I want to show everybody what the idea boards look like. And so if I go on the channel currently, you guys can access the Notion page, right? Can you? Okay, I go in home. Okay, it's asking me to sign up.
And currently, is there a access we could give everybody to this Notion page, even if they're not editors, or no? We could make a Notion page public, right? That should be possible. Because if it's not edit access, so I'm just gonna show, we're doing logistics for projects. So can you all see my screen? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, this is what I don't like about Notion, that it starts free and then of course everything has a plan. And this is the older Notion page. And do you know where the idea boards are? Okay, so this is one example. This happens to be from 2025. I'm going to put together everything from 2022 onwards. And what you should do is, in some sense, just share what you're interested in. This is not a framework for, oh, this is a problem that I'll eventually end up working on, but it is also a problem. It's possible that you end up choosing something that you write. But we often collect sort of sets of scenarios on. So I'll just pick something. You can see there is a framework around education, health, biotech, ecology. I'll pick a fun one, which did end up turning into a project last year, which was, and this is not much detail is here, but the core idea is here. There was a student from plant biology, and one of the key things we were thinking about is in the context of what happens in science education when you engage in thinking about plants as compared to many other things. And the ironic aspect of that is, we assume plants don't move, which is totally not true, right? You all know that plants move, and they are super dynamic. They just do it at a different time scale. And one of the key projects was that we actually built an instrument that revives a 150-year-old experiment that amplifies plant movements in real time. So what I mean by that is plants are actually growing as you see them. I mean, of course, people say bamboo is growing almost uh, I think bamboo and kelp has the world record. But sort of it evolved from here. The early framework around the question was around making plant biology fun in an educational classroom. And then the project ended up being demonstrating in real time plant growth. So you watch and you watch an indicator that's actually telling you that the object that is sitting right in front of you is actually growing. Now, there's all kinds of tricks involved, lasers and mirrors, and we did many different things to be able to do that. But it sort of evolved from just this brief idea. And this was based on a talk that I had given around some of the history. So, you know, the notion, what I'm trying to say is that the idea board doesn't have to have a well-refined question yet. We're going to use a framework very soon to refine these ideas. But it's valuable if you're passionate about something, make sure that you populate it. So I'll just pick another one, for example. We already talked about microplastics. This is an interesting one. So this is sort of a thread on, this is Danny. Danny was a first year student in the oceans department, and we didn't end up working on this, but we ended up working something similar in the space per se. I don't know how many of you guys know about the big viral infection that happened in Monterey. Did anybody read about it? Do you guys know that we had a massive die-off? No. The wasting disease, has anybody heard of that term before? No. Anybody online, have you guys heard of the wasting disease? No. So it turns out there are, I mean, I don't know how new this is, but there are viral infections that are massively spreading. Nobody really understands why. And in fact, it's actually quite hard to be able to prove itself what happened. But we had a massive die-offs of all the starfish. And just since you didn't hear about it, I need to show this to you. Wasting disease, Monterey, starfish. So if you have been to Monterey, this is what it would look like. It's called the sea star wasting disease, and it's the worst possible thing. And you basically start seeing all marine life literally start dissolving. So if you go touch it, and I'll show you guys a video for this. This is another example. And you notice just parts of the starfish are lying around. And this is a massive sea killer, it's called. So you can see it's literally the most of the biodiversity is literally falling apart right in front of your eyes. This happens to be a viral infection that was identified and it spread across multiple species. But the problem is that we find most of these things too late. And so one of the framework around that project was, could we use the kind of diagnostics tools that we already use in our conventional settings to be able to apply that to a marine context? So from a purpose of an idea board, what would you have to write kind of a framework of by the numbers for that particular problem. So you know and understand the scale of the problem. You have to first identify a space that you're actually excited and would like to work. You can write multiple things in the idea board, but at least one of the problems that you write and describe should be something that you're passionate about. Because if you're not passionate about it, what's the point? So at least one of the things on your idea board you should assume. But again, you might read something that someone else wrote and is like, I didn't know this. This is something very interesting. I have skills in viral detection. I've read about low-cost ways of detecting viruses because you would have to do this at a very, very low cost for it to actually work in an environmental context rather than per human. So this can't cost $10, $15 because you'll get lots of null results if you want to detect it early. And if it's already apparent that you can see it, then what's the point? I mean, then you have a test as a visual test already. So you have to choose, you have to run the by the numbers. And then the framework would be is you are diving deeply in the problem without explicitly choosing a specific solution. That's not the point of the idea board. So this is problem focused, not solution focused. You might have an idea. You could list it in the notes that, oh, I'm thinking in this direction. But it's important in this phase to just make sure that you're choosing problems that you don't, it's perfectly okay if you don't know where to begin. And we leave these boards for the next groups to come itself as well. So what we'll do is let's culminate all of the idea boards from 2022. And for some of them that have projects, we can link the YouTube channel around kind of because there is final presentations on YouTube for every project. And then you can also just take a look at how projects evolve per se. But for the people that walked in late, this week, it's very important that you start talking to each other, get to a point where you're actually passionate about something. And by next week, we need to have a team. So that way, between, 2 people, 3 people is a good, I would say 3 is a very good number. And then you can think about cross teams, whether they're online or whether they're here, doesn't really matter. Okay, let's just go back to the idea board for another second. Let me see. Okay, so this is interesting. This is now focused on a prediction tool for thinking about mosquito-borne infections, and the context is driven by not only diagnosing where mosquito-borne diseases are, but predicting them. So it's now you can see in the problem statement, the solution is already kind of creeping in. And so one of the things that you're writing the idea board is try to be really focused on the problem. And then the answer is that we need to be much more predictive, and then you can start listing. But what this is highlighting is just the fact that mosquito-borne diseases come as a surprise. How many of you have heard of dengue before? Anybody has had dengue? So dengue is not fun to have because if you get several people online, when you get the second strain, it becomes very complicated. We basically have absolutely no guards against dengue. and it's increasing every year, and it occurs and happens in places, and we have no predictability. And so kind of one of the things that you can start thinking about is, could you do something proactively when you know these massive peaks of dengue occur? I'm going to talk quite a lot about this tool, so maybe let's see if I can actually show it to you guys, if it happens to be a good FRDPARRC. But we're going to use this tool called FRDPARRC, and maybe I'll just actually introduce it today because I'll use it for the mosquito sort of a framework. So I'll go to the whiteboard in a second. It's still loading. Alex, can you erase the board for a second? And then I'm going to draw while I go through this. It's still loading. So one of the context is we are in phase 1 of this framework that we will use. How many of you have actually heard of a FRDPARRC? Have you heard this acronym before? Alex knows this. This is the MIT thing. I learned it in grad school. I use it for all my problems. I learned it from Alex Slocum, who teaches a really fun design class, but kind of he initially teaches it in the complex context of precision machine design, but I find it useful in general. Do not take food, drink out of this room. Okay, I was worried it's like no food or drink in this room. So this is loading, and so we're going to actually try to make a FRDPARRC in real time. Can you all see my screen? Or, oh, if I stop sharing it, is there a way to show that here? You know, Enrico?
The camera, but I can make it large.
Yeah, let's just move the camera. And let's do a quick FRDPARRC for, so instead of this one, I want to choose a topic that one of you cares about. So why don't we have permanent marker? That's no good. And I will modify this in a second once we start going. But who has thought about a problem when you join the class, something that you're actually passionate about and want to do a project on? Anybody? What do we want to solve in this world? There must be tons of problems that go in your mind. You say, I wish this didn't exist. Climate change. Okay, so now that's an interesting way. So you said climate change, but now you think about climate change is just a word, right? It doesn't qualify as a problem per se in the granularity of what I am thinking about here. So let's go deeper. What about climate change do you want to solve? What about it? Let's break that problem down, because climate change is an umbrella word we use for thousands of things that are happening on this planet. That the culmination of that, it is a convenient word that allows, but what about it? So this is the point, is when you're writing an idea board, when you're choosing your project, it has to have the precision. Remember what we did with by the numbers? You all were choosing, so choose something that you did by the numbers for that would qualify as an interesting problem. Did anybody do any by the numbers on climate related threats? What was your by the numbers? You did one on the pollution, right? The Nigeria, yes.
I did like carbon sinks and sources, so looking at animals as a carbon sink. It's like a natural solution.
Yeah. But you did this much more to first track where the carbon is going or how much carbon is in. Yeah. Anybody else online that did by the numbers on a very specific problem in climate change?
I'm not sure, but I did on water contamination and water pollution in Bangladesh.
Yeah.
So in India. So yeah.
Big thing that you can think about, and there might be links to climate. And actually, I'm going to link this to dengue for a second. It turns out we have enough data to now show that changing temperature is fundamentally changing where mosquitoes can live. So in colder climates where they couldn't live, now the belt changes and suddenly hundreds of millions of people that have never actually been exposed and are completely naive in their immune system to many of these viruses would be accessible. So there's a massive amount of work that's shown how climate change effectively. So now that's a problem. Now that's a much more specific thing, which I would say, spread of mosquito-borne diseases because of change in temperature, right? So there has to be a kind of granularity. So let's choose something else. Maybe we'll choose one problem from the room here and one problem online. So online, if there is anybody who wants to raise their hand, tell me a problem that you're passionate about solving that you came to join this class for. And then we'll start with that, but then I'm not going to leave you guys on the hook. Tell me, I'm going to choose one problem amongst this group, and then we'll do a quick FRDPARRC for both of them. Anybody? You can just raise your hand. Is there a problem that kind of is in your mind that you would be passionate about solving this quarter or this year for that matter? Okay, so I have Kennedy, I have Honey. Anybody else? I spoke to Kennedy on the weekend, so I know what he's gonna say. So Kennedy, I'll give you a chance in a second. I also have an intuition for what Honey is gonna say. I want to choose something that I have not heard of at all. So I'll wait for a few more seconds. Anybody wants, it doesn't have to be something that you have thought about, but it has to be something that you care about. I'll wait. This is the prompt is for everybody. I'll wait until you guys tell me something you're okay. So let's 1, 2, and 3. Yes. And can you remind me your name?
Ryan.
Yes.
I'm interested in reducing PM 2.5 in in the air in India.
Okay, so that's a very specific problem, air pollution, India specifically. You want to add context to this in your idea board because the way you would reduce PM 2.5 here would be very different from how you might do it in India because context changes, sources change. So we're going to take this one and write a FRDPARRC for this. Trevor?
Trayvon.
Trevor, yes.
Yeah. Like decreasing single-use plastics.
Yeah.
To landfill.
So landfill, single-use plastic. And I think, this is a massive thread. And you could even break it down further. So maybe just add a context to it. So it's useful because a strategy someplace else might be very different. If you were to do this in Indonesia, it would be very different from how you might do it in New Jersey for that matter. So was there a place you were thinking about when you're thinking about this?
Honestly, United States.
Okay, yeah. So the US is a good analogy. And then you can also break this a little bit further down to say, oh, I want to be on the upfront end, which is not even use the single-use plastic. The second train is like, oh, I don't want that single-use plastic to recirculate in the ecosystem. And so that's a much more of AI recycling. Recycling is terrible. There is nothing recycled currently. It's a myth. So if you go back to some of these plants, then you learn that, wait a second, it just all goes to landfill. The percentage of recycled material that you throw in your nice bin to the one that is actually recycled is very, very small. It's a technical problem. And then the third piece of this could be is like, oh, I don't want it to leach into the environment. The fourth version of this problem might be is like, oh, I want to remove what has already been leached into the environment. So I think it has to have granularity. These are too big for you to kind of build a project out of because otherwise it feels too overwhelming. You have too many directions to go to. Okay, so let's take another one. Yes.
This is just something I've thought about. It's been a while since I thought about it. But PFAS, like detection and remediation.
So tell us more about PFAS. What was your name?
Kelly.
Kelly. What is PFAS, Kelly?
PFAS, they're perfluorinated chemicals. So it's like a class of chemicals. So PFOS and PFOA have been banned, but perfluoroalkyl substances. but this is like the class of chemicals that have multiple fluorines attached to it, and it is usually used to make things waterproof and oil-proof.
So is Teflon
Teflon
is
is
a
like
PFAS category?
Teflon is made from PFAS.
Got it.
Yes.
Mhm.
But
And then
there-
why are PFAS like what's the actual problem?
The actual problem is that PFAS don't degrade.
I see.
Nothing in
Not just
biological
why we use
systems
eats them or
knows how to do anything with
Yeah.
them, and we're very
Yeah.
far off from
Yeah.
like a biological.
And then thinking a little bit, should I think of it as a health implication
Yes,
on human health side of the story?
yes, both human and marine health.
I see. So human and actually, so I like that you said both, but for your idea board, it should be more specific. So let's actually choose marine health. I'm just, you get to choose whatever you want, but I think ideas has to be a very specific thing because the way I would tackle it in a marine context is very different from thinking about this upfront problem. Maybe you can't do anything about it at an immediate scale, but you can actually think about monitoring to even know whether this is leaching in our environment. Then people will actually be aware that there is a link between the two. Okay, so let's take a few from the class now. So Kennedy, Honey, and I can't read that. Is that Vedant?
Yeah, Vedant, yeah.
Vedant, Anjana, and Divyanshi. Okay, Kennedy, go ahead.
Good evening, class. Hello, everyone. I'm passionate about a major trend here in Nigeria. In Nigeria, poultry farmers use antibiotics indiscriminately. And I believe that also adds to the problem of antimicrobial resistance here in Nigeria.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at a way of using the tools from Frugal Science to develop a diagnostic mechanism or framework so that when there is a disease breakout in farms, they can easily diagnose and then know the right treatment to administer.
Yeah.
And
so,
also develop.
Kennedy, this is fantastic because last year we had a student and a team from Ashoka, and they worked on this in the context of India and North India. And actually, one of the important threads is that this is very, very common. One of the largest leach of antibiotics is coming from farmlands. And of course, it has a social context as well now in the problem. So you already mentioned Nigeria, and you might also think about this, that not just a location, your solution might involve the actual farmers themselves, because if you don't involve them, then none of this would make sense. So you've lost that context. It's one thing to say, oh, my solution is gonna focus much more on the policy side of the story or the people that are actually feeding the antibiotics. So the problem statements have to have as much context as you can inject. So I'm going to go rapidly and then we'll come back to one or two of these. So Honey, next. Yes.
Yeah, so I will not reiterate the water part. There is another problem that I'm working on, and so the energy consumption by the data centers, and now few data centers, and India plans to build data infrastructure and data centers in Bangalore. So the humid environment and the availability of energy, as we heavily depend on coal as our primary source for electricity. So that is also one thing that I'm working on.
I really like this problem. It's almost, people are not even thinking about it as yet. And one of the conversations that Alex and I had in Chile was realization that many companies are now buying land in some of the most pristine parts of the world, trying to build data centers there because of all kinds of scenarios when it's hidden far away. I mean, of course, cooling with the ocean is one thing that's starting to grow, but you can start asking yourself also what infrastructure is actually needed. Most of the time, they pump cold water. So it's not, and then that cold water is used, it's 10 to 14 degrees Celsius. And so I think structuring this, and I think you already chose India as a specific framework around this. It is interesting to say what the numbers that are being tossed around in terms of, say, if even 30% of US energy in the next 4 or 5 years might only be coming from data centers. I mean, that is a huge number to think about.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't know what that growth curve actually looks like for India. Okay, let's keep going. Maybe I'll take two more. Vedant and then Anjana. Go ahead.
Yes, hello everyone. So I'm passionate about food. I don't mean I enjoy it. I mean I enjoy eating it, but I have some problems regarding
That's
food.
a great statement to start. Yes.
So more specifically, there's this category of foods called ultra processed foods, and you can think of or ultra processed foods are basically foods that are not really foods, they're formulations, and formulations of protein isolates, modified starches, emulsifiers, stabilizers. So pretty much anything you don't find in your regular kitchen. That's what ultra processed foods are made out of those. And the reason why I'm passionate about these foods are because these foods are very, very new. The first ultra processed food was, I think, coal butter, which was invented during World War II. And it's because that these foods are very new that we don't really know what the impact of these foods is on our diet. So it's only been like around 50, 60 years. And so far, we have strong epidemiological studies that link these foods with, cardiovascular diseases, type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. But we do not have answers to very country specific questions. So of course, I live in India, and one question that I'm particularly interested in is what is the environmental footprint of UPFs compared to traditional Indian diets? So in the US and in the UK primarily, UPFs have pretty much UPFs dominate your diets. But in India and a lot of South American countries, we're still in a state where we're half traditional and half UPFs. So for example, my generation, I'm 22 years old, my generation still eats a good chunk of traditional foods and ultra processed foods. But the younger folk that are growing, so 10, 12-year-old kids, their diet is increasingly becoming more UPF. So interesting
And I
research.
have young kids, and I can intuitively say that that feels right because more and more things that I put in their lunch boxes are packaged rather than what I cooked for them in the morning. So I think,
Exactly.
Vedant, one question, just because I want to jump to multiple threads. So in terms of a problem, I would say UPF, then add a tag and context to it. Would you want to measure and tools to measure the amount of UPF? Is it much more of a context of thinking about a direct health link to know whether there are significant health risks associated with consumptions of UPFs?
Yeah. So that's one thread.
Just want you to narrow it a little bit.
Yeah, so that's one thread. So I was just coming to that. Measuring UPF's effect on, particular health outcomes in India, because that's something we don't have research on. And number two would be measuring that in younger populations. So children that are just, growing up. So people aged from 0 to 16 and how that impacts development. So those are two questions I'd like to explore.
Yeah. Okay, let's do last one now. Anjana, go ahead.
Yes, sounds good. So just for some context, this is a project that I explored in a different class, but I actually hadn't gotten a chance to think about it from a frugal science perspective and actually engineering solutions for it. But the context is that in several Indian states, the hysterectomy rates are far higher than medically justified. And I think the statistic I remember reading is that in some specific regions in India, the hysterectomy rate was showing to be about 10 to 20% of women and 5 times higher, or almost 10 times higher, but depending on the village, than the global hysterectomy rate. And so and the question was why these hysterectomy rates were far higher than medically justified. And it was revealed that they were often happening with very benign conditions, like just menstrual pain or irregular bleeding, even though there was conservative treatments that exist. And the problem was that these health systems were making surgery easy and like these conservative options much more fragile. And since they required follow-up and the hysterectomy was just this one-time solution. So I'm interested in approaching this problem from a frugal science perspective and thinking of solutions that aren't necessarily inventing new drugs, but finding low-cost diagnostic solutions for these women.
That's a fantastic problem. So actually, not knowing much about this, I would say the granularity of what you're describing, it's a nuanced problem. So I think this is another important thing to remember is there's lots of people working on lots of things. When you have a kind of granularity, I mean, ultra processed food has a similar granularity in some way, then you are starting to dig a little bit deeper. So, one thing to think about, every one of these sets of problems has a fantastic, lots of threads, solutions to be thought about. But every one of them, you have to make sure that you first understand the context before you'll be able to fill out what a FRDPARRC, which we'll talk about now, is. So I mean, in this particular one, maybe what I'm hearing is there might even be the class of just what does a decision tree actually look like? What does a diagnostic, because there is utilization of certain sets of scenarios where it's urgent and necessary and important. Overdiagnosis is also a huge issue in many of these, but unless you frame the problem in that way, the solutions are not going to be so obvious. So let's choose one or two to try making a FRDPARRC out of. I think one thread to think, maybe we'll do it for multiple at the same time. So just going back to now, you have a vague idea. You should all have something. This is an exercise that everybody will be doing, so this is not optional. Every one of you is submitting multiple FRDPARRCs for things you're passionate about in your idea board. And what's useful is we will use this tool as a way to populate and have you rethink a little bit in how well you understand the problem that you're thinking about. So, and this acronym might change. I have to go check whether am I typing this right, Alex? Did I get it right? So functional requirements, design parameters, analysis, risks, and countermeasures. So I can remove this. Maybe this sounds right. This is what I care about. Functional requirements is just what is it that you actually care about? What would be the key sets of requirements that you would feel? I mean, there's a problem statement beforehand, but post the problem statement, we're going to try becoming a lot more granular. If you succeeded, would you know that you succeeded? Right? And that's why we have to put numbers to it. And so PM 2.5, right there in that sentence is that, oh, I can just measure it. I want to lower certain sets of metrics that PM 2.5 falls down by X%. Right? So you would write that to say, okay, let's say 50% in a given volume, in a given air. So that functional requirement already has a very quantitative metric embedded in it. You want that to fall by 50% in, say, a 5-year time. And that could be an interesting functional requirement. It doesn't matter whether you know how to do it, but it feels that anybody who would invest in this, anybody who would actually support this, anybody who would work on it, feels like there is a metric to go after, right? And then it might be far more granular. You might say, oh, I want to focus on PM 2.5 that primarily arises from tires. I don't know if you read this paper. A significant portion of plastic we breathe comes from tires because you change tires every year. Where did the tire go? We breathe that tire. And I mean, that's the reality because erosion of a tire is primarily going. You might say, you mentioned India, there is a huge, I was in one of the offices and there's a massive, people think about, oh, governments don't like doing anything, blah, blah, blah. That's actually not true. There was a big commission that was set up in India. And the problem in India for the air pollution in North India turned out that it's paper cuts. There are so many things that cause and culminate, and every one of the chunk only takes 3 to 5%. But accumulation wise, so for example, building construction,
does not require any coverage. So dust and all construction materials like cement are kept in the open. Guess what's going to happen when a little bit of wind blows? All of they get aerosolized. 5% of the problem. In a given period of time, somebody burns something, another 5% of the problem. That's what's called when farmers in North would burn. And so because it's not one of them, it kind of becomes, and that's why you have to be granular. So you might say, if you're going to work on something like this would not be the right approach unless you also justify that, oh, I'm going to target a very specific version, because if the goal is reduction, so you have to understand the problem to see whether you've chosen a functional requirement that is even approachable. Because if this has 50 different threads, I cannot imagine one thing that you would do that would change that framework, right? Okay, so this would be the functional requirement. This is an easy one. Let's pick a hard one. Anybody wants to pitch a functional requirement for anything that's on the board there? You can look at the ideas that you heard, but try to make that quantitative, that there would be a feeling that you would know when you succeed. Honey, go ahead. Which one?
Decrease arsenic contamination in Indian drinking water sources.
Yeah, so now let's do that in a arsenic contamination water. There's a big thread on this because we've had collaborations with a group here. I'm missing the name now. This is a person that's worked in lead. Honey, you probably know this, in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. Lead pollution. It turns out, do you know who I'm talking about? I'm missing the name now. He's the head for the Center for Planetary Solutions. Steve? No. Okay, the name will come. So it turned out that they had discovered that everybody's used turmeric in your cooking. You guys know what a turmeric is. It turned out that parts of the world and some of the imported turmeric itself uses lead chromate. And so lead was leaching into kids' blood because of that as a pollutant. And they work a lot on kind of policies, detecting. Lead also leaches through batteries. And so there are similar sets of scenarios around. Arsenic has been the oldest story in water. And so if you were to make this granular as a functional requirement, you know that there is arsenic in the water table. How would you write your functional requirement for it? What would you say for this problem should be the functional requirement? How do you know that you did something that actually was quantifiable for it to be a functional requirement? For arsenic. This is in the groundwater, I'm assuming. What do you really want to measure? That's it. So first you need to know how to measure it, and then you measure it and you reduce that number, right? So now the question is, do we have metrics for measuring? It turns out there's plenty metrics to measure. So you can directly measure arsenic. You can then ask like, oh, wait a second, my solution might go down if it turns out that we don't even have metrics of measuring and it's just what's happening in humans, and that poisoning is what's there. So then you would write a functional requirement that's very specific to first you have to develop a way to measure something. And they're all turning out to be, this is very similar in environment. So I'm going to switch now. We'll choose something in health space. But of course you have to measure, and you have to put the context around groundwater. And you could just choose one specific way that people access that water. So hand pumps. Hand pumps is a classic way. It's a very specific kind of groundwater. It will have certain sources. And from that measurement, you would come down and ask yourself a question that the functional requirement is that it should be below the WHO standard. You would know what the standard, there are sometimes already standards set. There's also 2.5 also has a standard from WHO. And I think, it might turn out that this by itself is actually still an unsolved problem per se. Like to truly do large scale survey that any citizen just before you drink your water. Most of you know what happened in Flint was actually driven by lack of measurement itself. Like we just didn't have that infrastructure. Okay, let's choose another problem.
Anybody in the class, you want to choose something from the board? It doesn't have to be the problem that you stated, but how would you write the functional requirement for it?
For Anjana's
Yes.
hysterectomy,
Yes.
perhaps a way to diagnose, you're right, just benign, irregular menstrual cycles instead of something that requires hysterectomy.
So now suddenly you've kind of explicitly written as a functional requirement would be in the context of diagnosis, right? And in some way, when we do diagnostics, there is this two terms that we always use, sensitivity and specificity, which relates to your false positives and your false negatives, right? In this case, what's happening is the false positives are what is causing the problem because they're overusing the tool per se, right? And at that same time, you want to also make sure that you don't get a false negative because at the end of the day, that is an important tool in the tool chain. And so, you have to review and ask yourself a question for the current diagnosis that they're using based on which they make hysterectomy as a recommendation. What is the actual false positive and false negative rates? Like, what is it, the specificity and sensitivity of their tests? And then you can put those numbers and you can very explicitly say that we have to improve those numbers to be greater than 95%. So you really know that our decision matrix is right. It might turn out then, so this is one example. This would come down to specificity, sensitivity. And then you're starting to see why we did by the numbers. If you don't do by the numbers, you cannot actually write down any of these very, very quantitative metrics to say that you're working on a problem or you're going in the right direction. So that's why it's important to do the by the numbers for that problem first, so that you get a good landscape. You turn that into a functional requirement. And I think we're going to run out of time. So I'm just going to do a little bit rapidly that this is the homework that you're all doing. The next comes design parameters. So design parameters are slightly different from the functional requirements. It's because here you really care about the problem. In no way or form I'm mentioning anything to do with the solution at all. And I think this is also important to decouple. Sometimes as scientists or engineers, we're married to ideas that we've had, that you've thought about, and it's okay to have that, but it's important to also feel that the problem should stand alone. Because somebody else might come along, take this exact same problem, and I think what you want to do for one single functional requirement, you want to have a ton of different ideas that you might be thinking about that would act as key sets of design parameters. So you might approach this problem in many different ways, and then you could restructure that exact same problem in a manner that allows you different sets of approaches. So to a certain extent, this will split. One single functional requirement might lead to completely different alternative rights, but also design parameters are something that you're explicitly now starting to go into the granularity of which way you would actually tackle a given problem. So for example, let's just choose the air pollution and expand that a little bit. Maybe we chose, let's just choose vehicles and let's explicitly choose tires. If you care about, say, I want to reduce PM 2.5 from tires, yes.
For every design parameter, is that where cost would be at?
Cost would come in, and so I think cost should actually have been in the functional requirement itself.
Oh.
To a certain extent. And then, of course, eventually, this is the analysis is where you would do, so this is analysis. This is where you would do certain sets of scenarios to say, the ideas that you're portraying, do they actually meet the metric of the functional requirement, where cost is also one of the functional requirements? Because it might not make sense, like if we ended up choosing MRI as an approach to this, that just doesn't make any sense from a context of, I think, she mentioned the number of people passing through the certain sets of costs associated per MRI might not work. So you should include cost in your functional requirement,
but then use the design parameters to start laying out a given idea. So we're just going to choose, say, tires. Let's just do a 2-minute brainstorm. How would you reduce plastics that are coming out of our tires from our car? Why don't cars suck in all the plastics already? Like, I mean, we're designing a car. Why don't cars already have ways that they don't emit certain types of So, that's it's like, oh, is that possible? Like, what if I start thinking a little bit in terms of that one class of solutions can really be focused on a remediation. Another class is like, wait a second, why do tires erode anyway? What if we really rethink that another direction would be is like maybe we need to rethink what tires are made out of, or maybe they should not break down in this particular way when they break down. Maybe they should break down in a totally different mechanism as compared to this granularity that's associated with friction. So you can go down that list to say, I'm trying to structure, but then again, every aspect of a FRDPARRC is far more quantitative than kind of something that you feel, because when you feel something, it's not sufficient. So what we're trying to use this framework for is to make sure that you're starting at every step of the way you're inserting numbers so that you feel that I'm confident. So one of the things that it might turn out, like I just said something about a design parameter in this is I want to focus on the car itself as a mechanism to, say, suction back in particles, right? And then, or think of a filter that's built in the car itself. There's another, which is a redesign of the materials in the tire. You could keep going with many sets of ideas. And now for every one of them, what you're doing is an analysis, which is to say, does this even make sense? Can I actually convince myself with pencil and paper? How much energy would it take if you were to have a suction mechanism? What is the rate at which a tire is emitting a particle? Is it that it's emitting it once a month? That wouldn't make sense if you're using that much energy but it's possible that it's actually emitting a particle per minute. Super simple to do that calculation because you know the rate of degradation, you assume it's average the same. Maybe it changes, the curve changes when tires get older. So you can write down an analysis pipeline. The purpose of the analysis is to find loopholes. You're trying to find loopholes. And then this is super easy. This is risks, what might not work, and countermeasures are how you go about fixing that. Okay, so before everybody leaves, this would be the second assignment. I'm assuming all of you have done by the numbers at this point. And because we're making teams next week, it's very important. Choose one problem that you care about, make a FRDPARRC for it. Bonus points if you actually do it for other people's problems. Anybody can make a FRDPARRC on anybody else's problem. And then we'll find a collective way to start posting those. Does that sound good? Yeah, but I think it's very important. We have to transition. As I had said, the class is not, it's not a passive class, it's an active class. And so now is the time you have to make commitment. It might feel like it feels overwhelming. You're not ready to commit to a project, but trust me, we're here for the process. It's okay if you don't solve climate change during this quarter. I would be happy, but you would have learned through the process. So that's a very important framework. So don't feel at all in the sense like, oh, I chose two. There is no problem that's too small in some way. So balance that by the choice that you make. And actually, the more granular you are, the more likely you will have something that's novel. Yes. Okay, and I'm holding you back. So if you guys have to run, you should run. Yeah.
Should we choose FRDPARRC from here or we can?
No, this was just an exercise. People that are online, just anybody can choose any FRDPARRC, any problem you care about, as long as it fits in this broader framework where we've been talking about human health, science education, environmental challenges, but choose what you care about. I think you had a fantastic problem It's a very specific problem. So I think you should do a Fred Park with that. If you don't do it, who is going to do that? Right? And it has all the elements of thinking about, and it's perfectly okay if you don't actually work on that as a project for the class. Yes.
Do we choose our own teams or?
Yes, everybody chooses, this is totally volunteer, so you should start talking to each other as you start feeling passionate about specific problems. Do these problems together. It's perfectly okay that if you did a Fred Park together and then you guys did a Fred Park together.
Can you get the contacts of the people?
Yeah, I think we have
Yeah,
that
on
all on
Discord.
Discord. So
Yeah.
you can start posting on Discord to say, this is a problem I'm interested in. Anybody wants to join in? Because the purpose of this is nobody's being evaluated as singular. There's no singular contributions here. The key goal is that you find other people that are as passionate as you are, that'll stay up late and actually work with you. And this is how you will eventually see that, oh, you joined a team because you like the style that those team members work in rather than the specific problem itself. That's perfectly okay. Yeah, so I think this is not, I just want to make sure that we at least have as many Fred Parks as there are people in the class. So, if you're two of you are working, then try doing 2 Fred Parks. Because this is, it's a thought experiment. And it's perfectly okay that you will get stuck in some of them. Some problems are so hairy that it's very hard to kind of say, I don't really know where to begin, right? And that means that your statement is not granular enough. And so forcing yourself to do this is actually changing the scope of the project. That's what we're trying to do here. Okay, any questions? Any threads online? We'll do a little bit of an open mic. And then we will see you all on Thursday. I am thinking of doing, when should we do the Fred Park discussion? So it's possible that I'll pick 1 or 2 Fred Parks on Thursday. And then definitely on Monday, I'm expecting that everybody's done a solid Fred Park. And then let's figure out what we're gonna do online in some sense. Any questions from the online cohort? Do you all have a good idea of what you want to do your first Fred Park? Go ahead, Kennedy. Kennedy and Vedant. Yeah.
So we that are part of the online cohort, how do we fit into the project?
So although you are online, everybody is working together. So you see there's lots of people in the online community and the physical community here, but projects are not divided that way. So you might have one student from here, one student from Ashoka, and then Kennedy U. And they're all distributed, and effectively for some of the things that we will do prototyping and other threads on, some of you might take a more computational role, some of you will take a construction, sort of more building role. That'll depend on resources that are locally available. But don't think of it as you're not trying to do a project alone. The purpose of this is that you feel strongly that you find members in the community that are also passionate about the same sets of problems that you're passionate about. Does that make sense? And then
Yes,
for
it does.
specific
Yes.
projects, I'm going to try to figure out to get the resources that you need to do certain sets of things. That might mean access to, say, makerspace in Lagos, or that might mean access to certain kinds of compute capacity for someone. I think that'll depend on what we are trying to do. Once we've figured out that you have a specific project in mind, then we will work on gathering sets of resources. Okay, Vedant. Yeah, go ahead, Kennedy. Yeah.
Sorry. And the projects are research based, like this other part of teaching kids how to use the fold scope.
No,
to
I
view
think
one or two things.
the projects are
Is
what
that
you
considered a
described.
project?
The project for the class Kennedy is an open problem. It has to be something that you don't know as yet how to solve. So the poultry antibiotics, overuse of antibiotics in Kenya in poultry farms, that's a project. If you already know how to do something, then it's not a project. Then you just have to go do it.
Okay.
Do you see what I mean?
I do. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Vedant and then Divyanshi.
Yeah. So I was looking at past projects for Frugal Science or past projects that students have
Yeah,
undertaken.
yeah, yeah.
And although I do have my own ideas that I'm passionate about, do you think it'd be worthwhile to consider projects that you guys have already done and perhaps we could build on? Because if that works for me,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, for example, Vaibhav is here recruiting for a project that he's been working on for a year. And talk to him. He's going to post that. And we already have field data. We already have the instruments. We have the context of the problem. It's very useful to choose past projects. There was a project done almost 3 years ago. I think Divyanshi might remember this, Subhir. And one of the teams worked on detecting elephants and elephants walking from miles using seismic activity. It's a beautiful project. We used kind of optical mice, the mouse that you use in a computer, to make a seismograph that was sensitive enough to detect elephants walking. We got to a point where we built the instrument, but we never checked its sensitivity. And so you can pick from there. The problems have not disappeared. So anything that you like from the past, as long as you feel you're passionate about it, is fair game to build. And I think some of the older team members would be very happy to join itself as well.
okay, yeah. Thank you.
Okay, last comment from, yeah, Divyanshi, go ahead.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes,
Hello.
good to see
So,
you.
yeah, same here. It's night, so I'm a bit sleepy. I'm so sorry. So the thing is, I'm working upon project which is dealing about psychological well-being as an umbrella term. To be specific, it's about digital stress, which comes due to a lot of usage of digital technology as well as social media platform. Apart from that, stress in general, which leads to rise in cortisol levels in people, as well as there are other biological indicators like changing heartbeat rate and all these things which happen, which in turn, because I'm doing PhD in OB, which in turn leads to a lot of problems in the people who are working in organizations. They lose their motivation, they lose their productivity, and many more detrimental effects happen. The team in general also collapses. This is one of the projects which I was working on. I mean, right now I'm collecting qualitative data to understand what is happening, how it is happening. But then I want to scale it up, maybe design an experiment and, integrating biotechnology with
In 2 minutes.
maybe integrating biotechnology with organizational behavior and applied psychology to understand this phenomena in general, what is leading to decline in psychological well-being, how to deal with digital stress and reduce it and ensure that there is better health of people. So I wanted to
Yeah, so
hear from
Divyanshi,
you.
one comment that I would make is very much like the climate change problem. This is such a large space. I mean, when you think about the statistics of number of hours, average kid, say from 15 to 20-year-old is being exposed to a screen. I mean, those numbers are astronomical. It's crazy. And but it's valuable to sort of even think from a granularity point of view. There is lots of issues and threads. You can choose either the biological direction, you can just choose, wait a second, what wavelengths of light are we exposed to after, say, 6 p.m.? You can break this down, and maybe what's useful then in that when you write the FRDPARRC for this particular one, write it in a manner that it has a kind of granularity to it so that it's a subset of this larger problem, and it's still useful because then suddenly you could imagine uh, sort of sets of solutions that can have an immediate implementation plan around them, while there are other sets of things that need to be in place. And it's perfectly fair for these types of problems that people have an intuition for, but they don't grasp quantitatively. It's perfectly okay to build a project that actually builds awareness around these problems itself. So rather, because the solution is so behavioral, I mean, the same goes with mosquitoes. Rather than working on dengue, to first think about where dengue would occur and predict it and build a measurement platform around it. So for certain sets of problems, it is people's understanding of the gravity and the scale of the problem. And so this would fit in not just science education, but the education context more broadly. And that's also a fair. But one thing I'll do is when I read through people's FRDPARRCs, I'll kind of give comments of if we want you to narrow them down. Because otherwise it feels that anything you do is a small drop in a larger scale, which is always challenging and it is tough. So try dividing it in a subset and see whether you can actually tackle one of them. I mean, I think light is a very interesting one that people have been looking at more recently, specific wavelengths associated with threads. Okay, so I have a couple people waiting for me. I'm going to run now. Good luck with the FRDPARRCs. I will work with Alex and Enrico to give you guys access to read access to the Notion pages and simultaneously a place where you guys can start writing and submitting. We're just going to choose a very simple format. But right now, you guys can also use Discord. If you care about a problem, we can do assignment number 2 in the Discord channel, and then people can type in all the ideas they're thinking about. You can choose, post a time saying, oh, I'm online at this hour if anybody is interested in discussing this particular problem. And especially some of you who have worked in research, you can act as mentors, lead a discussion, share what you've been. I mean, make a FRDPARRC for the problem that you are working in your PhD or your master's or your undergraduate right now. So this will both help you in what you're trying to do, but you might also mentor several other people who might not have structured their thinking as much. Okay, I gotta run. I'll catch you guys on Wednesday, and then I'm excited about now finally picking